Why has the truth about the continent that gave birth to civilization been erased from its history books? Have you ever wondered who really taught Moses to hear the voice of God? And what did the Bible hide about the profound spiritual traditions that flourished under the African sun long before Mount Sinai? This is the story of the African prophets that the Bible erased. We will delve into the best-kept secret of the Old Testament, proof that the foundation of Judeo-Christian law and prophecy is not purely Hebrew, but carries the spiritual DNA of African kingdoms like Cush and Kemet. The revelation is undeniable. The flame of the burning bush was not new. It was an ancient ritual taught to Moses by his African father-in-law, the priest of Midian. This truth not only rewrites the past, but also heals the present, restoring the spiritual authority of an entire continent. Prepare to see faith with new eyes. If you seek the truth that official history has silenced, join our journey. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and comment below. From what part of the world are you hearing this ancient revelation? In the lands where the Nile traces the map of life, lies a secret guarded not only by stones, but by the very sands of time. The existence of prophets and priest-kings whose wisdom was consciously excluded from the great books. The elders say that the first voice to echo the unity of the Creator came from under the incandescent sun, in what we call Kemet and Cush, and not from any other place that official history insists on telling us. The mystery lies not in what was written, but in what was erased. Imagine, once, sacred knowledge was so vast that hundreds of dark pyramids, older and more numerous than those of Giza, were erected to honor the passage of God's men and women. Why, then, have most of the names of these great African seers evaporated from our scrolls and become a shadow under the Sphinx's gaze? The journey of these seers, my friends, is a journey of forced silence. They held the key to cosmology, understood the cycle of life and death, and spoke directly with the forces of nature. Egypt and Nubia were centers of spiritual initiation, from where the light of the law emanated in all directions. This wisdom, however, confronted the growing power of newer narratives, which needed a single stage, not an entire continent, to shine. It's frightening to think that the spiritual force of these civilizations was so great that, to weaken them, it was necessary not only to destroy them, but also to hijack their deepest concepts, rename them, and pretend they originated in another land. What we feel today as divine justice, our sense of order and truth, has its spiritual seed in the ancient African Ma'at, who was the first to dictate the balance of the universe. But time, that ancient master, is just, even though the names of the prophets have been swept away, the pyramids of Cush remain there, majestic in their ruin, like indelible landmarks whispering truth to the wind. They are proof that biblical history is not a beginning, but only a chapter that rested on a much older foundation, guarded by those who came from beneath the shadow of the Sphinx. They say that history's greatest enemy is not time, but the scribe's pen. There was a time when the wisdom of the world gathered in the great library of Alexandria, a beacon of knowledge that housed texts from all lands, including the spiritual secrets of Kemet and Cush. It was there that the subtle and devastating process of the scribe's silence began to take shape. What unfolded was not a mere translation error, but a conscious and political decision. As the Hebrew and later Hellenistic narratives gained strength, it became imperative to construct a unique spiritual lineage. To do this, it was necessary to remove the bridges that linked the origin of the law and prophets directly to the heart of Africa. Consider with me the spiritual conflict this generated. For the new narrative to establish itself as the only and purest one, the original source, African wisdom, had to be diminished, made secondary, or simply deleted. The scribes, seated at their desks, were not merely copying. They were editing the past, ensuring that the colors of Africa, which painted the ancient world, faded away. This journey of exclusion resulted in what we now call the canon. A powerful text, yes, but one where African contributions are deeply hidden, disguised, or reassigned. Therefore, the revelation of Egypt or Cush, which once shone in its entirety, can now only be found in fragments and legends scattered across the continent. But the truth has a way of surviving. Even if the passages have been cut, the shadows of the original concepts remain in the subtext. The silence of the scribes forces us to dig deeper, to distrust the obvious and to search for what has been deliberately omitted, preparing us to find the key figure who connected Moses to this forgotten wisdom. History teaches us that the law descended from Sinai through Moses, but ancient legend tells us that the law was already there, guarded by a man whom the world prefers to call simply father-in-law. Jethro, the priest of Midian. This man was not a wandering shepherd. He was the guardian of a knowledge that linked the heart of Africa, Cush, to the shamanic traditions of the desert. The mystery runs deep. Why was the man who gave shelter, a wife, and, crucially, advice on how to govern to the great liberator reduced to a secondary role? The revelation is that Jethro was not merely offering hospitality, but rather initiation. He saw the spark in Moses and placed him under the tutelage of the natural and spiritual forces that he, Jethro, mastered. The symbolic journey of Moses when he joins Jethro is that of an arrogant Egyptian prince being stripped of his adopted culture to be reborn in the powerful simplicity of desert spirituality. He learned from Jethro to read the heavens, to hear the spirits of the earth, and to understand the true meaning of power, not the power of Pharaoh, but the power of cosmic unity. The spiritual unfolding of this connection is vital. The Old Testament itself reveals that it was Jethro who offered sacrifices to the God of Israel even before Moses received the Ten Commandments. This is not a mere detail. It is proof that wisdom already existed there and that the African priest was ahead of the Hebrew prophet in his understanding of the divine. This link is forbidden because it reveals that the foundation of Israel's faith is not purely self-originated, but rather a sacred heritage passed down by a prophet of African lineage. Jethro is the secret whispered in the wind of Sinai, the preparer of the way, and his legacy invites us to understand where the true strength that would ignite the burning bush came from. When the fire consumed the bush without burning it, the world witnessed a miracle, but the ancients of Midian saw the manifestation of a familiar power, a spirit that the priest Jethro knew well. The mystery surrounding the burning bush is not whether the fire was real, but who or what was manifesting through it, and where Jethro got the knowledge to guide Moses to that sacred place. The ancient revelation is that the site of the burning bush, Mount Horeb or Sinai, was long ago a sacred peak for the traditions of Midian, Cush, and Kemet. It was not a chance encounter, but a ritual of invocation where the deity of thunder, storm, and the mountain manifested itself, as was common in the archaic theologies of North Africa. The power that revealed itself there did not have a single cultural banner. Moses' symbolic journey of removing his sandals was, in fact, an act of profound humility and submission to the spiritual customs of Jethro and the Midianite people. He was being instructed to respect the sanctity of the land, to accept that the power he sought did not come from palaces, but from a deep and wild connection with nature, an undeniable mark of ancestral African spirituality. The spiritual unfolding of this flame lies in the fact that it represents the definitive transfer of prophetic authority. Jethro, the guardian, was handing over the keys to the mystery to Moses, ensuring that the knowledge of how to interact with the divine, of the sacred name and its manifestations, would be preserved through his initiate. This hidden flame, which does not consume but reveals, is a powerful hook that connects us to the next piece of the puzzle. It forces us to ask, if the power came from a place already sacred to Africans, what other key concept was incorporated from their traditions to shape the basis of the law? Before Abraham, before Moses, and even before the city of Jerusalem was known, there existed a mysterious priest-king, a figure shrouded in legend and incense smoke, Melchizedek, the king of Salem. His story is a small and unsettling paragraph in Genesis, but ancient storytellers say he holds the key to an African prophetic tradition that time has tried to bury. The great mystery is this: Melchizedek is presented as the priest of the Most High God, El Elyon, and it is to him that Abraham, the father of the Hebrew nation, pays homage and gives tithes. This reveals a glaring historical conflict. The tradition of the Most High God was already known and venerated in the region through a priest whose geographical and cultural origin pointed to the archaic traditions of Upper Egypt and Canaan, challenging the chronology of Abraham as the first to know the one God. The symbolic journey that Melchizedek represents is that of a pre-existing spiritual authority. He symbolizes the purity of an older faith, a lineage of priests who did not need an exodus to know about the Creator. His act of blessing Abraham with bread and wine is not merely hospitality, it is the ritualistic transfer of an ancestral blessing and knowledge that came from a different spiritual source. The spiritual unfolding of this figure is so profound that the Bible itself, much later, uses it as an archetype of eternal priesthood, without father, without mother, without beginning. This is an echo of African cosmology, where divinity and ancestors were seen as eternal and self-existent, and reinforces the idea that the seed of monotheism did not sprout in a single soil. Melchizedek is, therefore, the silent proof that the spiritual foundation of the faith was already established in the region, often with direct ties to African traditions. His blessing to Abraham is the hook that leads us to seek other great prophecies that flourished beneath the sand, far from the Egyptian palaces. While history focuses our attention on the conflicts in Egypt and Palestine, upriver there existed a civilization that radiated power and prophecy, the kingdom of Cush, with its capital in Meroe. This land, far from being a mere neighbor, was a center of spirituality and royalty so potent that, for a time, it even dominated Kemet itself, giving rise to the legendary dynasty of the Black Pharaohs. The mystery lies not in their political power, but in their spiritual power. The Black Pyramids of Meroe, hundreds of them, were not merely tombs, they were portals to a profound cosmological understanding. The priests and, crucially, the powerful queen mothers, the Kandakes, acted as oracles, uttering prophecies that dictated politics and the future, rivaling in authority the seers of any other ancient nation. The symbolic journey of the kingdom of Cush is that of a beacon of wisdom that persisted even as the power of Kemet declined. Its beliefs about the afterlife, the connection to the sun and thunder, and the deep bond with ancestors represent a pure and unbroken prophetic lineage, a treasure of faith that later colonizers and scribes could not fully access. The spiritual unfolding of this tradition is fascinating. They preserved archaic knowledge of the gods and the primal forces of nature, the same concepts that were subtly incorporated and simplified into the monotheistic traditions that emerged in the north. The authority of the Kandakes, for example, reflects a female role in spiritual leadership that has been almost entirely erased in other cultures. These pyramids, silent under the African sun, are more than ruins. They are proof that ancient Africa spoke prophetically with a voice of unparalleled authority. They force us to broaden our perspective and ask, if the priest kings of Meroe had such power, what did they prophesy about the fate of the Hebrews and the great exodus to come? At the heart of Moses' journey, a domestic conflict, often hastily read, holds a profound racial and spiritual revelation. Moses' marriage to Zipporah, the Midianite woman, and the criticism he suffered from his own siblings, Miriam and Aaron. This was not mere family gossip, it was an identity conflict over the purity of the new faith. The mystery lies in why the Bible explicitly highlights Miriam and Aaron's jealousy, and the reason for the questioning was Zipporah, whom the ancient text describes with a word that points to her African, or Cushite, origin. The revelation is that the new religion of Israel was not merely rejecting Egypt, it was attempting to disentangle itself from the African cultural influence that Zipporah and Jethro represented. Zipporah's symbolic journey is that of silent wisdom. She was living proof that Moses' spiritual foundation had roots outside the Hebrew lineage. Her marriage was the embodiment of an alliance with the ancestral wisdom of the desert, a connection that Moses' brothers feared could contaminate the purity of their own revelation. The spiritual unfolding of this tension is immediate and dramatic. Divine intervention, punishing Miriam with leprosy, a skin condition that makes her white as snow, serves to validate Moses' choice and union with African culture. This is an echo of ancestral history, showing that divinity endorsed the connection, while humans attempted to create barriers of racial purity. The woman of Cush is, therefore, the point of tension where the official story almost revealed the whole truth. She is the subtle hook that reminds us. The spiritual DNA of Israel carries, in its foundations, the indelible touch of Africa, and this touch influenced even what would become the basis of the law, the concept of justice. If you've ever wondered what divine justice truly means, the answer may lie millennia before the Ten Commandments, on the banks of the Nile, under the dominion of the concept of Ma'at. Ma'at was not merely a goddess in Kemet. She was the cosmic principle, the universal order, the truth and justice that governed everything, from the human heart to the movement of the stars. The mystery lies not in what was written on the stone tablets, but in what was already engraved in the hearts and papyri of the Egyptians. The revelation is that Mosaic law, with its demands for righteousness, truth, and ethical conduct, is a direct adaptation, a cultural translation of the principle of Ma'at. The demands of "thou shalt not kill" or "thou shalt not steal" were already the pillars of ideal African conduct long before the Exodus. The symbolic journey of Ma'at is that of the eternal balance. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If it was heavier due to iniquity, the soul would not pass to paradise. This ritual of weighing the soul is the spiritual backbone that influences the concept of final judgment and moral accounting that would later be seen in Judaism and Christianity. The spiritual unfolding of this connection is a challenge to history. The notion that ethics and morality emanated exclusively from a single people is dismantled when the supremacy and antiquity of African ethical thought is recognized. What we call God's law is, in fact, the African cosmic order redesigned for a new tribe. Ma'at, then, is not just an Egyptian myth. It is the hidden pillar that sustains the structure of Western faith. It is the stolen concept that forces us to seek other visual and spiritual similarities, such as the strange symbol of healing that manifested in the desert. The great waters of the Nile, which brought life and fertility, also became silent guardians of spiritual secrets. History leads us to believe that African wisdom was destroyed by conquest, but some of it simply sank, carried away by floods or, more recently, by modern dam projects that covered vast territories of the Kingdom of Kush. The mystery lies not in what has been lost, but in what the waters are protecting. Archaeologists and spiritual divers speak of Nubian temples and sacred cities lying intact at the bottom of the river, as if they were time capsules. The revelation is that in these submerged temples, the cosmology and original names of African prophets and deities are preserved in hieroglyphs, beyond the reach of human editing. The symbolic journey of these temples is that of returning to the source. Water, an element of purification and rebirth in most African traditions, conceals humanity's knowledge in a way that the water used in rituals, such as baptism, reflects. The Nile, like a father god, guards the purity of the original faith, the one that existed before the divisions. The spiritual unfolding lies in the belief that these submerged temples contain prophecies about the diaspora. Legends say that the prophecies recorded there foretold the oblivion and exile of the African people, but also their resurgence and the eventual rediscovery of their spiritual light in the modern world. These temples, silenced by the current, are proof that ancestral wisdom sleeps, but never dies. They are the underwater hook that invites us to emerge into another mystery of the desert, a symbol of healing that, being so ancient, transcends cultures and continents. During the arduous journey through the desert, the Bible recounts a strange episode. Moses' people are bitten by venomous snakes, and healing only comes when he raises a bronze serpent on a pole. This artifact, called Nehushtan, is a mystery that official history hesitates to explore, but which the ancients recognized as a well-known symbol of healing and ancestral power in Africa. The mystery lies not in the miracle of healing, but in the origin of the symbol itself. The revelation is that the upright serpent was a powerful Egyptian and African symbol, linked to wisdom, healing, and kundalini, the vital energy that ascends the spinal column. Moses' use of this icon was not a new invention, but a ritualistic adaptation of a concept already sacred in Kemet and other African lands. The symbolic journey of Nehushtan is that of the forbidden connection. The healing power, the very miracle that saved Israel, came from a symbol that was deeply revered in the lands they had just left. It was the tacit recognition that, even in the midst of their new journey, the medicine and magic of the ancient continent were indispensable for their survival. The spiritual unfolding of this bronze serpent is that it becomes a bridge to understanding that traditions of healing and power did not belong exclusively to one people, but were part of a universal knowledge, whose roots were strong in the Nile Valley. The power of life and death, of poison and healing, was under the dominion of African symbols. This symbol of the upright serpent, which would later be torn down by the kings of Israel themselves for being considered pagan, is the perfect hook. It leads us to reflect. If the people of Moses used African symbols for healing, what else in their worship and in their temple was actually borrowed from the art and technique of Cush and Kemet? Western history insists that the idea of the one God began with Abraham, or that it flourished radically at Sinai. However, ancient African wisdom whispers of an older and more complex truth. Belief in the primordial unity of creation existed in the Nile Valley and in lands further south, long before the founding of Israel. The mystery lies not in the birth of the idea, but in its source. The most audacious revelation leads us to Akhenaten, pharaoh of Kemet, who, in the 14th century BC, decreed the exclusive worship of Aten, the solar disk, and is considered by many historians to be the first monotheist in history. But in addition to him, the Kerma civilization in Kush already venerated a supreme god, the cosmic creator, who could not be represented by an image. The symbolic journey presented to us is that the revelation of one god was not a geographically exclusive event, but the culmination of a spiritual understanding that permeated the entire region. The idea that the Creator is the sole source of all life and order, and that he governs through justice, ma'at, was a mature and complex concept in African thought. The spiritual unfolding of this depth is that Moses, trained in the Egyptian court and initiated in Midian by Jethro, was immersed in this atmosphere of seeking unity. His revelation at Sinai, therefore, can be seen not as the creation of something new, but as the reinterpretation and purification of an ancestral African truth that was already in the air. Monotheism before monotheism compels us to recognize that Africa was the cradle of profound theological philosophies. This revelation prepares us to examine the physical and material influence, questioning whether African power and wealth manifested themselves even in the most sacred objects of Moses' people. Upon leaving Egypt, tradition tells us that Moses' people carried with them gold, silver, and fine fabrics, the spoils of the Egyptians. However, detailed analysis of sacred objects, such as the Ark of the Covenant and the Tabernacle, reveals a style, technique, and material wealth that point directly to the skills and patronage of the Cushite and Kerma civilizations. The mystery lies not in the gold itself, but in how it was worked. Archaeological and artisanal findings reveal that the techniques of goldsmithing, the use of semi-precious stones, and the art of weaving fine linen for sacred veils were unparalleled specialties of Nubia and Upper Egypt. Therefore, what was intended to be a purely Hebrew temple of worship carried African artistic and technological DNA in every detail. The symbolic journey of these artifacts is that of the material presence of Cush. The hands of Kerma, with their mastery in working with desert gold, built what was most sacred to the new people. This is a tacit recognition that, to build something worthy of the Most High God, Moses needed to draw not only on the spiritual wisdom of Jethro, but also on the material excellence of African civilization. The spiritual implications of this are profound. The beauty and splendor of the tabernacle, which represented God's presence on earth, were underpinned by the richness and art of a continent that official history has attempted to marginalize. The most sacred object of monotheistic faith was a masterpiece of Africa. The Kerma touch in the tabernacle forces us to recognize that African influence went beyond mysticism. It was embedded in the gold and fabrics of the worship itself. But how did these legends and truths survive when scribes tried to erase them? The answer lies in oral tradition. The time of kings and great temples brought with it writing, the recording of sacred texts. However, in many African cultures, ancestral truth and the purest prophecies were preserved in an even more powerful way, through oral tradition. This is the realm of oracles, priests, and above all, griots, the storytellers who are living libraries. The mystery lies not in what is written in books, but in what the mouths of the elders preserved. The revelation is that while scribes edited and cut passages to create a closed canon, the griots, in the heart of West Africa and in kingdoms south of the Nile, continued to narrate the legends uncensored. They guarded the forbidden connections, the erased names of prophets, and the true origins of the rituals. The symbolic journey of oral tradition is that of living memory. The griot is the thread that connects the past to the present, capable of reciting lineages spanning centuries. This form of preservation is organic, dynamic, and, crucially, resistant to destruction by armies or library fires, ensuring that the continent's spiritual legacy is not lost on paper, but in the hearts of the people. The spiritual unfolding lies in the fact that this language of oracles and griots offers an alternative version of history, one that is richer in spiritual detail and less polluted by political interests. It is through these whispered legends, these chants and rhythms, that we can reconstruct the profound theology that underpinned Jethro's faith and influenced Moses. The language of the oracles is, therefore, the faithful witness that survived the silence of the scribes. It points us to a period of great African splendor, where the pharaohs themselves fought to defend this wisdom against decline and oblivion. While history reminds us of the oppressive pharaoh at the time of the Exodus, it conveniently forgets the lineage of African kings who, centuries later, would defend Kemet and its ancestral wisdom. We speak of the 25th dynasty, the black pharaohs who came from Cush, Nubia, and ruled Egypt, not as conquerors, but as restorers of religious purity. The mystery is not who they were, but what they tried to save. The revelation is that these Nubian pharaohs, like Shabaka and Taharka, saw the decay and corruption of the cult in Kemet and acted as true prophets and guardians. They restored temples, revived archaic rituals, and attempted to protect the Egyptian religion from invasion and foreign influence, acting as a kind of last line of African spiritual defense. The symbolic journey of the Black Pharaohs is one of resistance against oblivion. They carried the purest spiritual DNA of Africa, coming from the south, where the wisdom of the Nile had remained intact for longer. Their rule was, in essence, a prophecy that true faith would shine again, even if the world was conspiring to extinguish it. The spiritual unfolding of this dynasty is that their struggle against the Assyrian invaders, for example, was a battle not only for land, but for the preservation of ancestral knowledge. They understood that once the wisdom of Kemet fell, it would be rewritten and distorted forever by the conquerors. They prophesied, with their lives, the great oblivion that would come. The prophetic Black Pharaoh is a vivid image showing that spiritual authority in Africa was not passive, but active and warlike. His fall, however, was only a step towards an even greater mystery. How was the power that invoked the divine at Sinai linked to the deepest rituals of the continent? Moses' encounter with the divine on Mount Sinai is described with elements of terror and majesty: fire, smoke, earthquake, and above all, the thunderous sound of thunder. The Bible interprets this as the literal voice of God, but ancient wisdom makes us question, was this event unique, or did it reflect rituals of invoking natural forces already practiced in Africa? The mystery is not the thunder, but Jethro's knowledge of it. The revelation is that, in the shamanic and spiritual traditions of Midian and the vast continent, there were specific rituals to invoke and interact with the Neter or Orisha of thunder and storm. Mount Sinai, a place of geological and spiritual power, was the point of convergence of these energies. The symbolic journey of thunder is that of connection with wild nature. The voice Moses heard was the manifestation of primal force, the same force that African priests knew how to honor and appease. Thunder, in Jethro's hands, was the subtle map showing Moses how to achieve communication with supreme power through reverence for the earth and its elements. The spiritual unfolding of this connection is that the foundation of monotheistic faith rests upon an ancestral African practice of communion with the cosmos. What was recorded as a miraculous and unprecedented event was, in fact, the application of ancient knowledge about how divinity communicates with humankind through the most powerful natural phenomena. The voice of thunder, therefore, is sonic proof that African wisdom was the catalyst for the new faith. It impels us to unravel the mystery of the very name given to this divinity, questioning whether it was not also a union of ancestral forces. The culmination of Moses' revelation at the burning bush is when the divine entrusts him with his sacred name, YWH, the famous Tetragrammaton. Tradition teaches that this name is the essence of I am that I am, a completely new revelation. But the mystery of philology and history suggests something deeper and less exclusive. The mystery lies not in the meaning, but in the composition of the name. The boldest revelation is that YHWH may be a synthesis of deities or sacred epithets already venerated in Sinai and North Africa. Some scholars suggest connections with the storm god of Midian, or even with theological elements from Kemet, where the idea of a self-existent being was already known. The symbolic journey of the name is one of sacred unification. Moses, having been trained in different cultures, may have received a name that encapsulated the power of various primary forces, the thunder of Jethro, the son of Kemet, and unified them under a single transcendental concept. The name is, therefore, the meeting point between African traditions and the new tribal identity. The spiritual unfolding of this composition is that, instead of being an invention ex nihilo, the name is a recognition and elevation of archaic spirituality. It is the confirmation that the God of Israel absorbed and honored the powers already active on African soil, guaranteeing their acceptance and authority in the region. The mystery of the name is, therefore, the indissoluble bond that proves that monotheistic faith is a theological mosaic, and that Africa provided the oldest and most powerful pieces. This unification in the desert foreshadows a much greater destiny, the reverberation of this faith in distant lands. The great forgetting and editing of sacred texts attempted to erase African prophecies, but truth has the capacity to cross oceans and survive captivity. Centuries later, when the African people were dispersed throughout the Americas, the seed of this ancestral wisdom blossomed in unexpected and powerful ways. The mystery is not what was lost, but what survived. The revelation is that Afro-American religious traditions, such as Candomblé, Vodou, and Santeria, are not new inventions. They are the codified spiritual memory of Cush, Kemet, and the kingdoms of West Africa. The Orishas, Vodans, and Lwa are, in essence, the ancient Neteru and deities that were erased from biblical texts. The symbolic journey of the diaspora is one of disguised return. The enslaved, forbidden from openly worshipping their gods, syncretized their deities with Catholic saints. Under the mantle of Mary, for example, one could find the worship of Yemanja, and under Saint George, the strength of Ogum. This cunning was the ingenious way of keeping the flame of the African prophets alive. The spiritual unfolding of this reverberation is that religious identity in America was shaped by the refusal to allow complete oblivion. The African legacy, which once influenced the law of Moses at Sinai, reappeared in the form of new and vibrant faiths, proving that the prophecy of wisdom's return was correct. The reverberation in the diaspora is the undeniable link that connects Nubia's ancestral past to the Americas' present, showing that Africa's power lies not only in ancient ruins, but in the vibrant faith of its people. This rebirth of memory leads us to seek the keys to this rediscovery. After centuries of silence and distortion, the modern era has brought with it an unstoppable impulse, the search for memory. Archaeologists, linguists, and, crucially, contemporary spiritual leaders are no longer content with the hegemonic narrative. They are digging, literally and metaphorically, in the deserts of North Africa and the forgotten libraries of Europe. The mystery lies not in what one finds, but in the courage to look. The revelation is in the rediscovered Coptic texts, in the Meroe hieroglyphs that are finally being translated, and in the legends recorded by the last griots. These documents and testimonies are unveiling the network of connections between Kemet, Cush, and the origins of Christianity and Judaism, rewriting the spiritual chronology of the world. The symbolic journey of this quest is one of reclamation. It is the moment when Africa, through its children and its allies in academia, takes up the pen and begins to correct the errors of the past. It is an act of profound historical and spiritual authority, showing that the truth was there all along, just waiting for us to have the maturity to recognize it. The spiritual unfolding of this investigation is that it has a direct impact on the present. Each name of a Nubian prophet that is recovered, each ritual that is deciphered, strengthens the identity and sense of belonging of millions of people who have been taught to believe that their history only began with suffering and captivity. The search in the desert is the burning flame of curiosity, proof that history is not static. And this recovery of memory has an inevitable and powerful impact on how African people and the diaspora see themselves today. For a people whose history has been intentionally fragmented and whose spiritual contribution has been erased, the discovery of the hidden African prophets and the influence of Cush and Kemet is not merely an academic fact. It is a revolution of the soul. The rescue of memory is, in truth, the rescue of identity itself. The mystery lies not in what was found in the past, but in what it does in the present. The revelation is the shattering of the myth that Africa was a spiritual blank canvas, a continent that only received faith but never generated it. By recognizing the depth of Ma'at's wisdom, the power of Jethro, and the prophecy of the Black Pharaohs, the African people and the diaspora gain a historical authority that redefines their relationship with the world. The symbolic journey of rescue is one of ancestral healing. The trauma of slavery and colonization, which often implied the rejection of one's own culture and spirituality, begins to be mitigated. The truth that their continent contributed to the founding of the major religions of the Western world transforms their self-perception, from victim to source of wisdom. The spiritual unfolding of this new vision is the emergence of a renewed respect for African traditions. Spiritual practices that were demonized and called pagan are now seen in a new light as guardians of archaic knowledge, which Moses himself used on his journey. The rescue of identity is proof that history, when told in its entirety, has the power to liberate. It foreshadows that this rediscovery is not an isolated event, but the fulfillment of a much larger plan long prophesied. The ancient African prophets, whose names have been erased, understood time not as a straight line, but as a great cosmic circle. They knew that every ascent implies a fall, and that every forgetting is merely a temporary phase before the inevitable return of memory. The mystery is not what will happen, but what is happening now. The ultimate revelation is that the forgetting of African wisdom was not a failure, but a divine test. The dismantling of false narratives and the rediscovery of the influence of Cush and Kemet on the Bible and global religions is the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. The truth, even buried, would resurface at the right time. The symbolic journey of time is that of the eternal cycle. The voice of the prophets, silenced by scribes and colonizers, is being retransmitted by modern technology through channels like this one. The knowledge that was denied for centuries is returning home, restoring the balance of Ma'at in global consciousness. The spiritual unfolding of this prophecy is that the public, in absorbing this story, is not merely learning, it is participating in a sacred act of restoration. The acceptance that Africa is a source, and not just a recipient, of world faith is healing the historical and spiritual wound. The prophecy fulfilled in the present concludes that the history of African prophets is not merely an echo of the past, but a living message that resonates with each of us today. It prepares us for the future, planting the seed of curiosity for the mysteries that still await beneath the sand. And so, the desert sand settles, revealing the outlines of a story that pen and fire tried to destroy. The African prophets, whose names were silenced, did not lose the battle, they merely waited. Their legacy lies not in intact monuments or canonical texts, but in the very fiber of faith that governs millions of lives today. Africa, the mother of civilizations, is not only the cradle of humanity, but the spiritual source from which the water of life and law flowed. The touch of Ma'at, the knowledge of Jethro, the wealth of Cush, and the resilience of the Black Pharaohs are irrefutable proof that divine wisdom has no borders and is not limited to a single people. Feel the weight of this revelation. Honor the silence that guarded this truth for millennia. The past is not dead, it is a voice that whispers beneath the weight of official history, inviting us to recognize and respect the depth of forgotten knowledge. But the journey of truth never ends. There are more mysteries sleeping beneath the sand, waiting for the right moment to be revealed to the world. Don't miss the next secrets. Subscribe to this channel and activate notifications. Our pact with ancestral memory has only just begun.